I need to tell you what happened in Las Vegas this morning, because if you've had one eye on your phone since sunrise the way I have, you already know this wasn't a normal news day for this franchise. Training camp doors opened, and buried inside everything that came with it was a moment that Raider Nation has been white-knuckling through for weeks. So let me slow down and walk you through this properly, because there's a lot here, and some of it is genuinely going to hit you if you've been living inside this story the way I have. Let's start with the surface level stuff, because even that carried weight today. Camp officially opened, and you had this wave of rookies walking through those doors for the very first time as professionals, mixed in with a handful of veterans who clearly weren't interested in waiting around for the mandatory report date. And right in the center of that early arrival story, unsurprisingly, is the one guy who has basically become the pulse of this entire organization, Maxx Crosby. Now, nobody should be shocked by this. He told everybody weeks ago he'd be showing up ahead of schedule, and true to form, the photos hit this morning showing him walking through those doors first. Not tied for first, not close to first, first. And that detail matters more than people give it credit for. When your most dominant player, the guy setting the physical standard on that edge every single Sunday, is also the guy setting the tone before a single rep has even been logged, that trickles down through an entire building. Young players notice it. Veterans notice it. It sends a message before a single word gets said in a team meeting room. Alongside Crosby, a handful of other familiar faces were quietly checking in too. Getting lockers assigned, working through physicals and paperwork, all of that unglamorous groundwork that never shows up on a highlight reel, but somehow ends up mattering more than almost anything else. There was no media access today, so we didn't get sound bites or press conference clips to pick apart. It was quieter than that. It was just work. Guys clocking in, settling into the grind that's about to define the next several weeks of their lives. But as much as I'd love to sit here and talk about first day vibes, there's a much bigger storyline that broke today. And honestly, it's probably the reason most of you are here. Because for weeks now, there's been this cloud hanging over the franchise, this nagging tension that refused to go away no matter how badly everybody wanted to look past it. I'm talking about the contract situation with Fernando Mendoza. Let me set the scene properly, because if you haven't been glued to this story the way I have, you need the full picture to actually appreciate what just happened. Mendoza was the #1 overall pick, the face of an entire draft class, the guy this front office bet the future of the franchise on the moment they turned in that card. And yet, as camp kept creeping closer, as the calendar kept flipping toward that mandatory report date, his name kept showing up in headlines for all the wrong reasons. Contract disputes, stalled negotiations, reports leaking out that things weren't nearly as smooth behind the scenes as everybody had hoped. And with every day that passed without a signature, you could feel the anxiety building across the entire fan base. People started whispering the thing nobody wanted to say out loud. Could this actually turn into a holdout? Could our franchise quarterback of the future genuinely miss real practice time over money? It's the kind of story that has you refreshing your phone at 2 in the morning hoping for a headline that just never comes. And I think it's worth pausing on the layers here, because this was never really about doubt in Mendoza himself. Nobody inside that building was questioning his talent or his commitment to the organization. This wasn't a will he report situation born out of attitude or ego. This was two sides, the front office and his representation, grinding through the mechanics of what a life-altering, franchise-defining contract actually looks like on paper. Structure, guarantees, the timing of payouts, the kind of detail work that takes agents and lawyers weeks to hash out even when both sides fundamentally agree on the bigger picture. But knowing that intellectually doesn't make it any less stressful when you're a fan at home who just wants your guy in the building, locked in, before a single pad even touches another body. So here's where the story turns, and honestly, this is the part that had me smiling the second the notification hit my phone. Yesterday, we got the first crack in the dam. Jamari McCoy, the franchise's 4th-round pick, put pen to paper and got his rookie deal done. On its own, that felt like a sign, like maybe momentum was finally shifting behind the scenes. And then today, right as training camp kicked off, right as every camera and every fan and the entire organization had its eyes locked on Las Vegas, it happened. Fernando Mendoza officially signed his rookie contract. 4 years, $57.2 million, fully guaranteed, with a 5th-year option built in to protect the franchise's flexibility down the road. Let that number actually sit with you for a second, because that's not just a paycheck. That's a statement. That's an organization looking a young quarterback in the eye and saying, "We believe in you enough to make this entire arrangement risk-free on your end." There are no half measures buried in that deal. No games. Just a full, guaranteed commitment from a franchise that has been chasing stability at the quarterback position for what genuinely feels like forever now. And when Mendoza stepped in front of a camera afterward, you could feel exactly how much this moment meant to him. He wasn't reading off some rehearsed corporate script. He genuinely sounded like a young man who had been carrying the weight of weeks of uncertainty and could finally exhale for the first time in a long time. He talked about how excited he was to officially be part of this organization, how grateful he felt for the support around him, how ready he was to finally focus on football now that the business side of things was behind him. And I don't know about you, but hearing that kind of raw, unfiltered gratitude from your franchise quarterback on day one of camp, that's the kind of energy that sets a tone for an entire season. Now let's actually talk about why this matters beyond the feel-good headline, because there's real strategic weight sitting underneath this timing. Think about what could have happened if this deal dragged even one more week. Think about the distraction that would have created walking straight into training camp. Every single practice, every single media session, all of it would have been dominated by contract questions instead of football questions. Instead, the Raiders managed to close this out on the exact day camp opened, which means there is officially zero excuse, zero lingering storyline, zero cloud hanging over this building as these guys start installing the offense, building real chemistry, and preparing for a season that honestly needs to look a whole lot different than the last one did. No distractions, no tension bleeding into the locker room, just football finally. When you're an organization trying to build genuine culture, trying to build real trust between a front office and a young franchise cornerstone, getting a deal like this done cleanly, without letting it spill into camp and poison the mood, that's a win completely separate from anything that happens on the field. So now my attention shifts to what's actually coming next. Pads go on soon. The rest of the veterans report on the 28th. Preseason games are right around the corner. And finally, mercifully, we get to talk about actual football instead of contract logistics. That, to me, is the real headline of the day. Not just that Mendoza is locked in, but that this entire organization can now pivot completely toward the thing that actually matters, building a competitive product on that field. But Mendoza's signing isn't the only storyline I want to dig into today, because something else caught my attention recently, something I think deserves just as much conversation heading into this season. Ashton Jeanty sat down and did a Q&A on his own channel, and what he said gave us a rare, honest window into what last season actually felt like from the inside. And I'll be straight with you, hearing him open up like that hit differently than the usual generic athlete talking points we're all used to hearing. If you remember, Jeanty came into this league as the 6th overall pick, and with a draft slot that high for a running back, the expectations were never going to be small. People expected him to walk in and completely transform this offense from day one. I'll admit it, I was one of those people. I had big expectations for him last season, and when things didn't click the way we all hoped, when the offensive line in front of him was inconsistent at best and downright shaky at worst, you could see the frustration building in his game week after week. He talked openly about how much pressure he put on himself, about how he constantly felt like he had to prove something, about how that mental weight actually got in his own way at times, instead of pushing him forward. And honestly, that kind of vulnerability isn't something we get from a lot of young players, especially ones drafted with this much hype attached to their name. Here's what really stood out to me though. Despite battling behind an offensive line that gave him almost nothing easy, despite carrying the weight of being the guy this entire franchise pinned its rushing hopes on, Jeanty still managed to push past 900 yards on the ground. Sit with that for a second. 900 plus yards behind a line that struggled to consistently open running lanes. That's not a small accomplishment. That's a sign of real, legitimate talent fighting through genuine adversity. And if that's what he could produce in a rookie season filled with self-doubt and shaky blocking up front, then my expectations for this upcoming year are through the roof. If that offensive line takes even a modest step forward, and if Jeanty is mentally in a healthier place the way he described in that conversation, there's no reason he shouldn't be blowing past 1,000 yards rushing this season, easily. What really got me, though, was hearing him talk about his mindset shift going into this year. He didn't talk about needing to prove doubters wrong or chasing some individual stat line for validation. He talked about wanting to have fun again, about remembering that this is still a game he genuinely loves, not just a job with a scoreboard attached to his name. He talked about wanting to be a better teammate, about bringing the locker room together, about focusing on making the players around him better, instead of obsessing purely over his own numbers. And here's the thing that I think gets lost sometimes when we talk about young stars operating under this kind of pressure. When a player shifts his focus away from individual validation and toward becoming a stabilizing force for the whole team, the individual numbers almost always follow naturally anyway. That's not just a feel-good sentiment. That's something we watch play out across sports constantly. Players who stop white-knuckling their own production and start trusting the process, trusting their role inside the larger machine, tend to play looser, freer, and ultimately far more explosively. And that mental evolution matters even more this season because Jeanty isn't walking into this offense alone. This team is building something with real talent surrounding him. Brock Bowers remains the focal point of the passing game, a genuine matchup nightmare that opposing defenses have to account for on every single snap. Behind Jeanty, there's real hope that a complimentary back can step up and take some of that workload pressure off, giving him fresher legs late in games and late in the season when fatigue usually starts eating into explosive plays. And then there's the quarterback room itself, which adds an entirely different layer of intrigue to this whole situation. With Fernando Mendoza now officially locked into the building, the competition at that position becomes one of the most fascinating subplots of this entire training camp. Kirk Cousins brings the experience, the veteran presence, the proven track record of running a high-level NFL offense. Mendoza brings the upside, the excitement, the sense that this could genuinely be the guy who defines the next decade of Raiders football if he's given the runway to develop properly. However that competition actually shakes out, and I honestly don't think anyone outside that building knows for certain yet, it's going to shape everything about how this offense gets built around Jeanty and Bowers moving forward. When you step back and look at everything that happened today, and honestly everything we've learned over just the last 48 hours, there's a version of this season that feels a whole lot more promising than what we all endured a year ago. A locked-in franchise quarterback with zero contract drama hanging over his head. A rookie class fully signed and ready to compete for real reps. A star running back who has clearly done some genuine soul-searching about his role, his mindset, and what it actually takes to thrive at this level. And a supporting cast that, on paper at least, gives this offense every single tool it needs to actually take a real step forward. Now, does any of that guarantee wins? Of course not. We've watched promising storylines completely fall apart plenty of times before once the pads actually go on and the real hitting starts. But I'll tell you this much, the energy heading into this training camp feels genuinely different than what we had at this exact point last year. There's a sense of alignment, a sense that the front office, the coaching staff, and the players are all finally rowing in the same direction instead of fighting through distractions and lingering uncertainty. And when you combine that with the raw talent already sitting on this roster, it's hard not to let yourself get a little excited about what's actually coming. So here's where my head is at, heading into the next few weeks. I want to see how this quarterback competition actually plays out once real reps start getting logged in pads. I want to see whether that offensive line can genuinely hold up better than it did last season, because if it does, Jeanty's ceiling this year could be something truly special. I want to see whether the culture Maxx Crosby is setting, by showing up early, by being the very first player through those doors, actually spreads through this entire locker room the way it should. Leadership like that only matters if it's contagious, if it actually changes how everybody else around him approaches their own preparation. There's still a long road ahead before the season opener actually kicks off, but for the first time in a while, I'm looking at this Raiders roster and feeling something a lot closer to genuine optimism instead of cautious, guarded hope. The distractions are gone. The money situation is settled. The mindset from the key players finally seems to be in the right place. Now it's just about translating all of that off-field alignment into what actually happens between the lines once the lights come on for real. And I think that's really what today was about, if I'm being honest with you. It wasn't just a contract getting signed or a running back opening up on a podcast. It was a franchise quietly exhaling after a stretch of uncertainty that had genuinely started to wear on everybody watching from the outside. You could feel it in Mendoza's voice when he spoke. You could see it in the way Crosby carried himself walking through those doors first, like a man who already knows what kind of season this could become if the pieces around him actually click into place. Days like this don't guarantee anything on a scoreboard in September, but they do something just as important. They set a floor. They give a locker room permission to stop worrying about things outside their control and start focusing entirely on the work in front of them. I'll be tracking every single development as this camp rolls forward, every practice update, every roster battle, every storyline that develops as pads finally go on, and this team starts truly competing against itself before it ever competes against an actual opponent. Because if today was any indication, this is shaping up to be one of the more meaningful training camps this franchise has had in a very long time, and I don't want to miss a single beat of it.